That morning, the absence of Sheriff Raymond Hale was noticed at the prison. It was unusual. He had never failed to appear for duty in more than a decade. His signature was urgently needed on a stack of parole files and disciplinary reports. Calls were placed to his office and to his personal number. The phone rang, but there was no answer. A correctional officer, Daniel Morris, was sent to his home with the documents. The house appeared quiet. The blinds were half drawn. The porch light remained on, though daylight had already settled. Morris knocked several times, no response. From inside, he could hear the faint vibration of a phone. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside. The air smelled heavy, metallic. In the living room, he froze. Raymond Hale was lying on the carpet. His shirt was torn, his chest soaked in blood. Multiple stab wounds were visible. A chair was overturned, a table broken, a lamp shattered against the wall. The room carried the signs of violence, but no sound remained. Morris dropped the files, stumbled backward, and rushed outside to call for help. Police arrived soon after, secured the scene, and confirmed the death. By midday, the news had spread across town. Headlines repeated the same words: "Sheriff found dead at home. Multiple stab wounds." The community reacted with disbelief. To many, Hale was the figure of law and order, the man who enforced discipline both in the prison and in the town. Now he was reduced to a lifeless body on his own living room floor. Speculation began quickly. Some whispered about revenge. Others suggested jealousy or some private affair. Questions multiplied, but no answers were ready. Who had entered his home? Why had they struck with such violence? And what secrets might explain the sudden fall of a man who held so much power? On paper, Sheriff Raymond Hale's career was a success story. Born and raised in the same county he later governed, he entered law enforcement in his early 20s. He advanced quickly, praised for discipline, decisiveness, and a reputation for never bending rules. By his mid-40s, he had secured the position of sheriff and assumed direct control of the county prison. To the public, Hale projected strength. He wore the uniform as a symbol, often speaking about duty, law, and order. In community meetings, he addressed citizens with confidence, promising safety and stability. For many outside the prison walls, his name represented authority and control. Within the department, opinions were divided. Some deputies admired his work ethic and his refusal to compromise. Others described him as harsh, impossible to please, quick to humiliate subordinates for mistakes. His command style was absolute. Disagreement was rarely tolerated. Inside the prison, the picture grew darker. Hale treated inmates not as individuals, but as property under his control. Reports later revealed a pattern: selective punishment, sudden transfers to isolation cells, denial of privileges. These measures were justified under the banner of discipline, but often appeared arbitrary, targeting those who resisted him personally. Female inmates were especially vulnerable. Several testimonies collected after his death indicated that Hale abused his position to coerce, intimidate, and exploit. Those who complied received protection from harsher conditions. Those who resisted faced solitary confinement, fabricated disciplinary charges, or public humiliation in front of other inmates. Official complaints were nearly non-existent. Most inmates feared retaliation. Staff who suspected misconduct kept silent, unwilling to jeopardize their careers under a superior known for his influence. Behind the facade of an upstanding sheriff existed a parallel reality, a man who thrived on control, who blurred the line between authority and abuse. When he was found dead, the public saw only the sudden collapse of a respected figure. But for those who had lived under his command inside the prison, the news carried a different meaning. It was the end of a tyrant. Inside the county prison, order was maintained through intimidation. Hale established a culture where silence was survival, and fear was constant. The facility housed more than 800 inmates, yet daily routines unfolded with a sense of unease. Every step, every movement was monitored, and punishment was never far behind. Reports later reconstructed the environment. Solitary confinement was used with frequency beyond standard guidelines. Inmates could be sent into isolation for minor infractions, speaking out of turn, failing to follow instructions quickly enough, or simply attracting Hale's attention. Cells designed for short disciplinary terms were often occupied for weeks. Prisoners left these units weakened, disoriented, and reluctant to complain. Privileges were treated as weapons: access to the yard, visitation with family, participation in work programs, all were granted or withdrawn at Hale's discretion. No clear pattern existed beyond one constant obedience was rewarded, defiance punished. This unpredictability intensified the tension. Inmates lived with the knowledge that any day, for any reason, their limited freedoms could disappear. Correctional officers operated under similar pressure. Staff evaluations were controlled directly by Hale. Officers who enforced his directives received protection and advancement. Those who questioned methods faced reassignment to less desirable shifts, disciplinary notes on their record, or removal from the facility altogether. The message was clear: loyalty to Hale mattered more than procedure. Accounts described the prison atmosphere as heavy, silent, and oppressive. Inmates avoided eye contact with staff, spoke in whispers, and warned newcomers quickly, "Do not draw attention." Even routine events, meal lines, head counts, medical checks were conducted under a cloud of suspicion. The imbalance of power was most severe in the women's units. Surveillance was weaker there, and oversight minimal. Testimonies revealed that Hale often visited these sections personally. His presence created fear beyond normal authority. Women knew that being noticed could mean sudden transfer, fabricated charges, or worse. Small details illustrate the climate. Lights in certain corridors left on through the night. Doors unlocked at odd hours. Officers escorting specific inmates without explanation. These observations raised suspicions among staff, but none spoke formally. No record entered official files. For those incarcerated, the prison was not simply confinement, it was subjugation under one man's will. Hale's authority extended beyond rules and regulations. It became personal, unpredictable, and absolute. Years later, when his body was found in his own home, former inmates described the news with a single word: inevitable. The homicide scene was processed in standard procedure. Forensic technicians documented the living room in detail: one body, multiple stab wounds, signs of struggle across the furniture. Photographs recorded blood patterns on the carpet, walls, and overturned objects. The weapon was recovered: a kitchen knife with an 8-inch blade, coated with blood. Initial assessment determined it belonged to the victim's household. The coroner's report listed cause of death as exsanguination due to multiple penetrating stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Defensive injuries on the arms indicated brief resistance. Estimated time of death between midnight and 3 a.m. Entry into the residence showed no damage to locks or windows. The front door was unlocked when discovered. This detail ruled out forced entry. Detectives considered two possibilities: either Hale knew the attacker, or the house had been left unsecured and someone exploited the opportunity. Officers canvassed the neighborhood. Several residents reported hearing raised voices shortly after midnight, though none called at the time. One neighbor recalled the sound of glass breaking. Another mentioned what they thought was an argument, muffled but sharp. No one observed an individual entering or leaving the house directly. Attention turned to Hale's recent activities. Phone records indicated no calls placed or received after 11:30 p.m. Alcohol bottles were located in the kitchen, one half empty, consistent with his known drinking habits. Investigators noted that intoxication may have reduced his ability to respond to intrusion. Surveillance cameras from nearby properties were requested. One feed captured a figure walking toward Hale's residence at approximately 12:45 a.m. The image was indistinct female build, wearing dark clothing, head covered. No vehicle was identified. The figure was not seen leaving, though camera angles were limited. Detectives compiled a list of potential motives. Robbery was considered, but deprioritized. Nothing appeared stolen. Professional retaliation from law enforcement circles was possible, but lacked evidence. Personal motives, revenge, jealousy, or past conflict were elevated in probability. The investigation shifted focus to the prison. Hale's role as warden created numerous enemies. Records identified former inmates with histories of conflict against him. Detectives cross-checked release schedules. One individual drew attention: Jessica Monroe, 31 years old, released less than 48 hours before the homicide. Her file noted disciplinary actions, repeated transfers to isolation, and conflicts directly involving Hale. Surveillance footage from a bus station confirmed Monroe's presence in town on the day prior to the homicide. Additional footage from a convenience store near Hale's neighborhood placed her within walking distance hours before the estimated time of death. The evidence was circumstantial but consistent. Investigators now had a direction: a recently released inmate with documented tension against the victim. By the end of the first week, the case had shifted from questions of how Hale died to who would have most reason to kill him. And the trail pointed toward a woman who had only just left his prison alive. Detectives secured a warrant based on surveillance, release records, and her documented history of conflict with Hale. The suspect was identified as Jessica Monroe, 31 years old, released from the county prison 2 days prior to the homicide. Teams traced Monroe's movements after release. Bus station footage placed her in town. Credit card records showed small purchases, food, cigarettes, a prepaid phone card. Witnesses at a convenience store near Hale's residence confirmed seeing a woman matching her description on the night of the homicide. At 6:40 a.m. on the 7th day of the investigation, officers located Monroe in a rented room at a low-cost motel on the outskirts of town. She was alone. No attempt had been made to flee the county. A kitchen knife set from the motel was intact, but in her bag, investigators recovered dark clothing and gloves, consistent with the figure captured on surveillance video. The arrest was without resistance. According to the report, Monroe opened the door calmly, said nothing, and complied with orders. Officers noted her demeanor as detached, expression flat. No visible signs of panic or surprise. At the station, she was processed, photographed, and fingerprinted. Interrogation began within hours. Detectives presented the evidence: the surveillance images, the proximity to the victim's home, the timeline of her release. She listened, offered minimal response, and finally stated, "I knew you would come." When asked directly if she killed Sheriff Hale, Monroe did not deny it. Instead, she requested to speak only under recorded statement. In that session, she began to recount her years in prison, her encounters with Hale, and the events that led her to his house on the night of his death. The homicide investigation had moved from uncertainty to admission. Jessica Monroe was in custody. The question was no longer who killed the sheriff, but why. The recorded confession began with silence. She sat in the interview chair, hands folded, gaze steady. When the detective asked if she was willing to explain her actions, she responded, "Yes, I have been waiting to tell this." She admitted entering Hale's home, admitted the stabbing, and stated plainly, "I killed him. I killed him because no one else ever would." Her statement then unfolded into a detailed account of her years inside the prison. She described them not as punishment for her crime, but as subjugation under Hale's control. "From the first month he noticed me," she said. "He told me I was different, that I could make things easier for myself if I did what he wanted. When I refused, the punishment started." According to her, punishments included weeks in solitary confinement with no explanation, food portions cut in half, and fabricated disciplinary charges that kept her under constant review. Every refusal led to harsher treatment. She described nights when guards escorted her from her cell to an office controlled by Hale. He locked the door himself, she recalled. He tied my wrists to the chair. He told me that I belonged to him and that no one would believe me if I spoke. The assaults were violent. She described being forced to comply under threat of further punishment. She recounted physical injuries, bruises, torn skin that never appeared in medical records because she was denied medical care. I learned to stay silent, to heal in the dark. Worse than the pain, she said, were the threats. Hale discovered she had a daughter, 5 years old at the time. He said accidents happened to little girls. He said if I didn't listen, he could make her disappear. I believed him. The fear of losing her child kept her compliant at times, but resistance never ended. I fought back when I could, she said. One night I spat in his face. He beat me, tied me down, and told the guards I had attacked him. They put me in isolation for 20 days. No light, no visits, no food except bread and water. Humiliation became routine. She described being paraded in front of other inmates after punishment, her injuries visible. Hale used her as an example of what happened to those who resisted. He wanted everyone to see what defiance cost, she said. The hatred built with each encounter. I thought about killing him in that office. I thought about grabbing his gun, about cutting his throat with his own pen. But there were always guards outside, always doors locked, always cameras. I never had the chance. She admitted that during her final year of incarceration, she began to plan. I told myself if I live to walk out, I will finish it. I will not let him keep breathing while I carry his shadow. Her release did not erase the resolve. Freedom only sharpened it. She described walking out of the gates with one thought, now I can go to him. On the night of the homicide, she followed him home. She waited outside until she saw him return drunk. She entered through the unlocked door. She stood over him as he stumbled into the living room. I saw his face, and I remembered everything, every bruise, every word, every night I wanted to die. She stabbed him repeatedly. She did not count the wounds. I wanted him to feel even 1 minute of what he gave me for years. When asked if she regretted it, she answered, I regret that it took so long. I regret that no one stopped him before me, but I do not regret that he is gone. He was a disease in that prison. I did what no one else dared to do. The confession ended without tears, without apology. Investigators noted her calm demeanor, her refusal to portray herself as insane or out of control. She framed the act as inevitable, a conclusion written years before the night it occurred. The record left little ambiguity. Motive was clear. Method was admitted. The only question that remained was how the courts would interpret her words as the testimony of a victim finally breaking silence, or as justification for calculated murder. The reconstruction of events on the night of the homicide combined forensic analysis with the suspect's own confession. On the evening before his death, Hale was observed leaving a local bar. Witnesses reported him consuming whiskey alone at the counter, departing shortly before midnight. He appeared unsteady but able to walk without assistance. Surveillance footage placed the suspect in the vicinity of Hale's residence around 12:45 a.m. She confirmed she had followed him home, remaining hidden until he entered. According to her testimony, Hale failed to secure the front door upon arrival. Inside the house, investigators found 2 empty glasses in the kitchen and an uncapped bottle of liquor on the counter. Blood alcohol analysis from the autopsy confirmed a high level of intoxication, impairing coordination and judgment. The suspect stated that she entered quietly, carrying a knife concealed in her clothing. She observed him lowering himself into a chair in the living room, turning on the television, and drinking further. She said she waited, watching him lose focus. Her statement, I stood there and remembered everything he had done. I wanted him to see me before I finished it. I wanted him to know. At approximately 1:00 a.m., she confronted him. Forensic signs indicated an initial struggle near the chair. Defensive wounds on his forearms confirmed that he attempted to block the first strikes. Furniture overturned during this period. One chair collapsed, a table leg broken, a lamp shattered against the wall. She admitted to stabbing him repeatedly, targeting his chest and abdomen. The coroner's report counted 13 wounds, with 3 identified as fatal. Blood patterns suggested the victim staggered, attempted to rise, and collapsed near the center of the room. She described the moment in detail. He looked at me and knew. For once, he was the one afraid. I wanted him to feel it, the helplessness, the pain. I kept striking until he couldn't move. Investigators noted that she did not attempt to flee immediately. Instead, she stood over the body. In her words, I needed to be certain. I needed to see him still. No evidence suggested she attempted to clean the scene or disguise the crime. The door was left unlocked, the lights left on, the body left where it fell. Forensic evidence matched her account. The angle of the wounds, the distribution of blood, and the sequence of overturned objects aligned with her narrative. The homicide ended in less than 10 minutes. By 1:15 a.m., Hale was dead, the house silent. The suspect exited, walking into the night without immediate pursuit. The scene remained undisturbed until discovery hours later by the correctional officer who came seeking Hale's signature. The conclusion was inescapable. The murder was personal, deliberate, and violent. Years of abuse and humiliation culminated in a single act of retribution. For Hale, the night ended with silence and blood. For her, it ended with release. Initial media coverage described the case in blunt terms. Sheriff found dead at home, multiple stab wounds. The headline spread quickly, repeated across television screens, radio updates, and online articles. Local stations interrupted programming. National outlets soon followed. For many in the community, the news was met with disbelief. Hale had been a constant presence, the visible figure of authority. Residents described him as strict but reliable, the man who guaranteed order. A memorial formed outside the sheriff's office, with flowers, candles, and notes left in his name. County officials praised his service and condemned the killing as an attack on law itself. But a different reaction circulated quietly. Among former inmates and their families, the death was described as inevitable. Some admitted they were not surprised. Others suggested openly that it was retribution for years of unchecked power inside the prison. Journalists began investigating further. Ex-inmates spoke anonymously of mistreatment and intimidation. Reports surfaced of fabricated charges, extended solitary confinement, and abuse hidden behind locked doors. Whispers that had once been ignored were now printed in headlines. Public opinion fractured. One side mourned the fall of a leader. The other questioned whether his death was less a tragedy and more a consequence. The shock was not only that the sheriff had been killed, but that his death exposed the dual reality of his life-respected protector in public, feared oppressor in private. The trial of Jessica Monroe opened 6 months after the homicide. The courtroom was filled to capacity every day, with reporters lining the benches, citizens pressing for seats, and deputies standing in the aisles. The murder of a sheriff, followed by a confession, had become a spectacle that no one ignored. The prosecution presented their case first. They described the killing as deliberate, planned, and beyond dispute. Surveillance footage placed Monroe near Hale's home. Forensic analysis confirmed the sequence of the attack. The confession was introduced in full, her own words admitting that she entered his house and stabbed him. The prosecutors stressed the number of wounds, 13 in total, as evidence of intent and rage. They argued that whatever grievances she held, the law provided remedies. Filing complaints, seeking outside intervention, even public exposure, these, they said, were options she ignored. Instead, she chose to kill. Witnesses from Hale's circle supported this view. Deputies described him as demanding but fair, strict yet dedicated. Local residents recalled his presence at community meetings, his speeches about order and safety. To them, Hale had been the embodiment of authority, and his death, they said, was not only a crime against a man, but against the institution he represented. When the defense responded, the tone of the trial shifted. They called former inmates who spoke of a different Hale, the man who used solitary confinement as a weapon, who punished disobedience with fabricated charges, who singled out women for exploitation. Their testimonies echoed what Monroe had already confessed: nights of coercion, threats against her child, and assaults that left no trace in official records. Medical files showing unexplained injuries were presented, small but significant pieces of corroboration. Monroe herself took the stand. She sat quietly, answered questions directly, and never raised her voice. She admitted again that she killed Hale, but framed it not as an act of malice, but as survival. "I did not kill a sheriff." She told the jury, "I killed the man who owned my life for years, the one who told me my daughter would die if I spoke. I waited until I was free, and then I ended it." The words divided the room. Some in the gallery wept, others shook their heads in disbelief. Reporters noted the split. One half of the county saw her as a murderer, the other as a victim who struck back when no one else would. Closing arguments sharpened the divide. The prosecution warned that if her actions were accepted as justified, law itself would collapse. No man, they said, could be executed without trial. The defense answered that the law had already failed her. Every safeguard had ignored her suffering. The killing was not justice, but it was the only escape she believed possible. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its decision. Jessica Monroe was guilty of murder, but the panel acknowledged the extreme circumstances. The charge was reduced from first degree to second degree. The verdict produced immediate reaction. Some shouted in anger, demanding the maximum penalty. Others breathed with relief, believing at last that her story had been heard. The trial was over. But outside the courthouse, the argument continued. Was she a killer? Or was she the final witness to a system that had turned a man in uniform into a tyrant? The sentencing hearing was set 1 month after the verdict. Public interest had not diminished. Once again the courtroom filled with reporters, spectators, deputies in uniform, and families on both sides. Security was visible at every entrance. The judge began with a review of the case. The jury had returned a conviction for second-degree murder, reducing the original charge after recognizing the defendant's circumstances. The record confirmed her admission to the killing, her detailed confession, and the forensic evidence that supported it. It also acknowledged testimony describing years of coercion, threats, and abuse inside the prison. The judge's statement was clear: the law could not condone vigilante acts, but it could recognize the failure of institutions that had left her without protection. Hale's misconduct had not been formally proven during his lifetime, yet the testimonies and evidence presented during trial carried weight. The system, the judge noted, had allowed conditions where such violence could grow inevitable. The prosecution requested the maximum penalty allowable under the reduced charge, citing the brutality of the attack and the need to reinforce the authority of law. The defense countered with a plea for leniency, describing the defendant as a victim whose actions were shaped by years of subjugation, humiliation, and fear for her daughter's safety. When the sentence was read, the room fell silent. Jessica Monroe was ordered to serve 20 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. The judge concluded with the statement, "This court cannot excuse the taking of a life, but it cannot ignore the circumstances that brought us here." Reaction was immediate and divided. Supporters of Hale's memory condemned the ruling as too light, calling it an insult to his decades of service. Advocates for reform insisted the punishment was still harsh, that she had already endured a prison term where she herself was the victim. To them, the system was punishing her twice: once for surviving Hale, and again for ending him. Monroe showed no outward emotion, Observers noted her composure, the same calm expression she had maintained since her arrest. She made no statement as deputies led her away. Outside the courthouse, the debate escalated. Groups gathered with opposing signs, some demanding justice for Hale, others declaring that justice had failed her first. The media carried the images nationwide. Editorials argued over the meaning of the case. Was it proof that no one is above the law, or evidence that the law collapses when it protects those in power instead of those most vulnerable? Within weeks, state officials announced internal reviews of the prison Hale once controlled. Questions were raised about oversight, about why complaints had never surfaced formally, about how such allegations could remain buried until after his death. Committees debated reforms, stronger safeguards for inmates, independent channels for reporting abuse, limits on unilateral authority within correctional facilities. For former inmates, the sentencing marked closure of one chapter, but not of the scars left behind. Many said the verdict confirmed what they had known, but could never prove that Hale's control was absolute, and that silence was enforced. For the public, the legacy of the case remained unsettled. One narrative saw a decorated sheriff murdered in his own home, his reputation tarnished by unverified claims from criminals. Another saw a woman driven beyond endurance, striking down a predator who had hidden behind a badge. The final record reflected both truths: a homicide acknowledged as fact, a history of abuse revealed only after blood was spilled. In the years that followed, the case continued to be cited in debates about prison oversight and the limits of authority. Law journals analyzed it as an example of how systemic failure can lead to individual acts of violence. Advocacy groups invoked it as evidence that silence inside prisons is not the absence of abuse, but the product of fear. Jessica Monroe remained in custody. Serving her sentence, she declined interviews, issued no public statements. Her silence became part of the story, the absence of commentary from the one person at the center of the case. The sheriff's legacy collapsed into contradiction. Official portraits still hung in county offices, but beside them lived the memory of testimonies that described him as something far darker. To some, he remained a lawman. To others, a tyrant whose end was inevitable. The conclusion of the file leaves only a blunt truth. One man, clothed in authority, used power until it consumed him. One woman, stripped of protection, carried her silence until it turned into violence. The result was a body on a living room floor, a conviction in a crowded courtroom, and a community left arguing over the meaning of justice.